Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the SEC's final Private Fund Advisor rules. My name is Pat Palinko, and I'm a partner and co-head of the investment management practice at Seward & Kissel. Today, I'm joined by four of my fellow IM partners, Dan Bressler, Debbie Francis, Joe Morrissey, and Kevin Neubauer. As a preliminary matter, we note that the final rules were scaled back from the proposals, but we're only going to be focusing today on what made it to the final rules. Dan will provide some background on the scope of the rules, followed by Kevin, who will provide background on the relevant compliance dates, and then we're going to jump right in.
So like Pat said, I think it's helpful to start with some scoping. So we're going to talk about 5 rules today. The first 2, restricted activities and preferential treatment, apply to all private fund advisors. That's both SEC registered and exempt reporting advisors. The other 3 that we'll cover, the quarterly statement rule, the audit rule, and the advisor-led secondaries rule, apply only to SEC registered advisors. There's also some good news for non-U.S. advisors. The SEC continues to take the position that they historically have that a non-U.S. advisor does not need to apply most of the substantive provisions of the Advisors Act to its non-U.S. clients. And while the restricted activities rule and the preferential treatment rule apply globally to all advisors, including ERAs, they do not apply to offshore unregistered advisors with respect to their offshore funds, and that's regardless of whether the funds have U.S. investors. So this is immensely helpful, but there are still ways that these non-U.S. advisors can be brought into scope. So non-U.S. firms looking to take advantage of this position should really do a thorough analysis based on their particular facts. The other big scoping piece is that these are the private fund advisor rules, right? So they apply to private funds. A private fund is an issuer that would be an investment company within Section 3 of the 40 Act, but for Section 3C1 or 3C7 thereof. A helpful carve-out is that securitized asset funds, essentially CLOs, are not included in these rules. They're specifically carved out. But other funds are not completely ignored. There is a similar pool of assets concept that applies to several rules that may draw in pooled vehicles that are not private funds.
And the compliance date for these rules are staggered, and in certain cases they're based on the advisor's private fund assets under management. So the compliance date for the quarterly statement rule and the audit rule is March 14th, 2025, regardless of the advisor's private fund assets under management. And the compliance date for the advisor-led secondaries rule, the restricted activities rule, and the preferential treatment rule varies based on private fund assets under management. So it's September 14th for larger private fund advisors, i.e. those with $1.5 billion or more in private fund assets. It's March 14th, 2025 for smaller private fund advisors, i.e. those with less than $1.5 billion in private fund assets. And the measuring date for both tests is as the last day of the advisor's most recently completed fiscal year.
I just wanted to briefly mention 2 items, which are that this set of rules also includes an amendment to the so-called compliance rule 20647 under the Advisors Act, which requires all SEC registered advisors, including those that don't advise private funds, and the amendment is requiring this, to document in writing the annual review of their compliance procedures. And this amendment compliance date is November 13th, 2023. So for advisors who have not been in the practice of conducting that review in writing, they need to focus on this fairly quickly. And there are also related amendments to the Advisors Act Books and Records Rule that will require SEC registered advisors to retain specified records relating to a number of the rules that we've talked about: the quarterly statement rule, the audit rule, the advisor-led secondaries rule, preferential treatment, and restricted activities rules.